Howdy, it's Jace, and today I am celebrating 6 years of sexual sobriety. It is February 2nd, 2021. I'm very excited to get to share this with you today. Many people have been like, hooray, 6 years, that's amazing. What does sexual sobriety mean? Totally fair question. I know we did a video about this, I think it was years ago. So let's go ahead and do an updated one. If you're interested, I'll explain what sexual sobriety means in general, and I'll give you a little rundown of what it means for me and what I'm celebrating today in my life. In general, when we're talking about sexual sobriety, we're talking about abstaining from specific reacting out behaviors that the individual has decided are unhealthy and even harmful or outside of alignment for them. And in this case, they're on the sexual spectrum. When we say that, we don't just mean sex. We really, that it's a whole big wide thing, right? So that looks different for every person. There's no prescription of what sexual sobriety looks like or what healthy sexual expression looks like, unless it's not consensual. That's different, right? I think we all can agree that anything that's non-consensual, either a person can't consent because of their state of consciousness, or they're a child and they can't consent, or they're an animal and they can't consent. Like those things, nobody's deeming those as healthy. I think we can all agree with that. But outside of that, it's kind of a choose your own adventure world that we live in the sexual realm. If and when the behaviors are healthy for each of us. And that looks different for everyone. So for me, some things that are behaviors that I've abstained from for these 6 years are things like infidelity. So being unfaithful if I'm in an agreement of a monogamous relationship. Sex that is dangerous. So I used to have a lot of sex that was unprotected, and it was with anonymous people and was not kind and loving and healthy for my body. I don't do that anymore. Compulsive masturbation. And if that's a weird one for you, that just means engaging in masturbation in a way that is outside of one's control. So like people are like, oh, you masturbated, what's the big deal? I masturbate a few times a week. It's like, oh, okay, cool. You ever do it for 8 hours a day? Like, do you ever like not go to work because you can't stop masturbating? They're like, no. Like, you ever hurt your genitals and your body from masturbating, but you continue anyway? And they're like, no. And I'm like, yeah, okay. That's when it's compulsive, right? And so like that was my reality for years. So I don't engage in that anymore. Pornography, for me, I don't find consuming that to be healthful. So that's not something I engage in anymore. So these will look different for everyone, right? Like there's nothing to say pornography in and of itself is unhealthy, or masturbation in and of itself is unhealthy, or anything like that. Like that's everyone's decision that they get to make. But when we're talking about sexual sobriety, we're talking about abstaining from the behaviors that each individual person has deemed unhealthful or out of alignment with themselves. And there may be some for other people that they have a very healthy relationship with masturbation. So that wouldn't be one of their reacting out behaviors, right? And when we're talking about reacting out behaviors, we're talking about these ineffective tools, just really what they are, that are inappropriate attempts at meeting appropriate needs. So just like with every area of addiction, sex addiction doesn't have to do with sex. Drug addiction doesn't have to really do with drugs. Food doesn't have to do with food. Gambling addiction doesn't have to do with gambling. Like all of these areas of addiction are attempts to meet needs. And so for those of us that gravitate in this realm, we use these types of behaviors or other people or fantasy in order to attempt to meet these needs, right? But the tools aren't effective. They don't really work. That's what we're stepping away from, right? So that's just a general understanding of sexual sobriety on its own. Now, for me, that isn't sufficient. Simply abstaining from something is not really what I want for my life. That does not lead to the boldly satisfying life that I am living into. I want freedom, where there was a time in my life that I wanted to engage in those behaviors. And I willed my, I use my effective tools like other people or, community, higher power, meditation, 12-step program, therapy, all of those things as tools to not engage in these harmful behaviors that I still wanted to engage in because I didn't have a healthy brain yet. The programming was still running, right? And I had to, and sometimes just by force, they call it white knuckling or just gritting your teeth or sitting on my hands to not get on some app. Well, back in my day, we used like personal ads and stuff. The apps weren't like a thing yet. But anyway, I'd like sit on my hands to not do that. That I was like forcing it. That's not a life I want to live, right? And I can't really call myself sober if the thing were available, I would do it, right? Like I've heard people say, I have X amount of sobriety, and so long as I'm never alone in the room with someone of the opposite gender, then I'm totally fine. And it's like, so if the thing was in front of you, you'd do it, and you're just like blocking all these things to make sure you don't do it. Like you've gained no self-responsibility, no agency over yourself. Like that's not sobriety for me. And to each their own. That may be sufficient for some folks or at certain times, because sometimes that's all we got, right? And that's plenty. For me now, I'm talking about freedom, where I don't work a program of recovery at this point. I don't engage in those direct recovery tools anymore. I don't need any barrier between me and my old reacting out behavior because I don't want it. There's nothing for me there. That doesn't make sense with the person that I am today. Like, I love myself and my body now, so I wouldn't allow someone to harm it. That would seem insane to me at this point. I don't need something that blocks me from accessing harm because I don't need a guardrail over a cliff because I'm not going to walk off the cliff because I want to stay alive, right? I don't. Does that make sense to you? So that's what I'm talking about when I say sobriety. And I didn't have that this whole time. Like I did the white knuckling. I did the, can you talk on the phone with me until the wee hours of the night just so that I don't call a stranger to come over or whatever, right? Like I did that stuff was where it was at now. It's just not where I'm at now. So in all of this, I've been working a holistic version of recovery where I'm not just treating symptoms. Those reacting out behaviors, the things that look like addiction, they're just symptoms. Addiction itself is a symptom. So the path of self-mastery, which is what I walk and what I guide as well, is really about going underneath all of that to master the self, not just the symptoms, so that the symptoms naturally go away because the self has no need for them, right? I don't need those tools anymore. They're not in alignment with where I am today. So I don't need any program to keep me from using them. I hope that makes sense. Talking about getting down to the roots instead of dealing with the rotten fruit, and then not having to ever think about it again because I've done the process of healing in my brain, in my mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical state as well. And I continue to do that work, always becoming more in alignment with who I really am. And the other stuff's just not present in my life anymore. And I'd have to go well out of my way to get into any of that at this point. If that's of any interest to you, to never have to think about it again and to actually gain complete freedom from addiction, go to my website. That is what we're doing over there. And there are other resources for it too, or you can combine a lot of different things as well. Just know that that's not the only option for recovery, is to white knuckle and to do the force thing. The forcing isn't the only option. There are a lot of options now, and I guide one of self-mastery. So if you have any interest in that, head to jacedowney.com. And otherwise, thank you for your time, and thank you for celebrating this wonderful anniversary with me, and for being present in my life and in the world as you are today. It is totally enough. I love you lots. And until I see you next time, stay curious.